welcome to Parallax, where we look at life from how we work. Joining us today is Father Peter. Father Peter is a Franciscan friar and priest and an instructor at Archbishop Curley High School. Father Peter, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity.
It's a great opportunity for us. So I would like to start off by asking a little bit about life as a Franciscan friar. Mm-hmm. So what was it that first attracted you to the Franciscan order?
I went to high school outside of Buffalo, New York. It was a Catholic high school that my community to this day still runs. That's where I first got to know the friars. I grew up very devout Catholic, every Sunday going to Mass with my family, and when I met the friars, they were different from all the other priests, all the other religious that I had ever known. They were really down-to-earth guys. They were normal kind of people. I noticed that, my family noticed that, all of my friends noticed that, so there was an automatic comfort and familiarity. And so as the years progressed and I continued, as teenagers do, wrestle with my faith, I felt the call. And I went to college, I kept thinking about it, praying about it, and I figured I'm not going to know for sure unless I try. So after I had graduated college, I joined the Franciscans, and my first step with them was to work with the poor on the streets in Philadelphia for 2 years. And it was there that I said, boy, if this is kind of what I get to do, live in community, pray in community, these are normal guys that enjoy a good joke, watching normal television, not sticks in the mud who pray all day, I could do this.
What do you mean by working with the poor? What are you doing?
Well, those first 2 years, I spent the first year working at a soup kitchen in the roughest part of Philadelphia. And the second year, I spent as a teacher's aide in a very poor Catholic grammar school. In between that, I was rebuilding homes for the poor. I was working at this duplex complex in a tough part of Philadelphia, where the house that I was helping to rebuild was right next to the drug house of the neighborhood. And having the opportunity to be a working witness, because I didn't show up dressed like this. I was wearing just normal work clothes and the type of clothes that you wouldn't mind getting paint on, with a 2x4 and a hammer, and helping to rebuild these homes for the poorest families in Philadelphia. It was an interesting experience because it wasn't constant prayer off in a chapel somewhere. It was real life trying to make a difference in the world.
So Father Peter, you're a priest, but you're also a friar. Talk a little bit about the difference between what a friar is and what a priest is and what a father is.
Well, I think the two most popular images, one for each, is if you think of Robin Hood and Friar Tuck, you know, the jolly fat friar who just is great to be around. I'm a member of, I'm basically a living version of Friar Tuck, though trying not to get as large as he was. We live in community. We pray in community. Everything that we have, everything that we need, we share amongst ourselves. It's a really intentional way of trying to be an example to the world that true peace, true joy, and true happiness can be had without needing to cling to possessions or wealth. That's the religious side of things. So I'm a member of the Franciscan Friars, started by St. Francis 800 plus years ago. And I'm also ordained as a Catholic priest, which means that the life that I get to lead is kind of versatile. I'm a member of a religious community, but then I also am available to minister the sacraments. So the typical parish priest that you think of, who is at the local church down the corner, I can do the same things that he can do, care for the poor, celebrate Mass, do weddings, and all those other type of sacramental ministries.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you were letting your family know that this was your calling, you know, mm-hmm. Parents oftentimes have designs for what they'd like their children to do. Yeah. So I'm sure that some families would be elated to hear that mm-hmm. you're going to enter a Franciscan friary and go to seminary. Other families may have wanted grandkids.
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about how your family reacted when you broke the news to them.
Well, I come from, maybe it's stereotypical, the perfect Catholic family. My father was in the seminary for 3 years. My mother was in the convent discerning to be a nun for a number of years. And they both chose different paths, met later after those paths became obvious and got married. So for me to say to them that I was thinking about being a Franciscan, thinking about being a priest, it was something that they were both very, very proud of. Now, I have a twin brother, and he now has 5 children. So there's plenty of grandkids going around. So there's not really the sense of, oh, we missed out on something because Peter didn't have kids. So it's a nice combination. Lots of grandkids, and I'm the priest in the family. So it is a little stereotypical, the Catholic family. But yeah, they were very proud, very excited. But interestingly enough, because my father had spent years in the seminary before he left and joined the military, my mother had spent time discerning as a religious herself. They knew what it was that I was thinking about. And so rather than being just sentimentally supportive, they were actually able to really support me because they knew what it was that I was doing and thinking about.
Mm-hmm. And now, in addition to being a priest who can be in charge of liturgy, things like that, you're also a high school teacher?
I do. I am. I teach at Archbishop Curley High School. I just completed my very first year teaching there. I teach morality, which is theology for our juniors, and I teach an elective in philosophy for our seniors. So there is always something new to be done. Our community does not just work in churches or just work in high schools. So I met the friars at the high school that I went to, and now I'm teaching at the other high school that we run here in Baltimore.
Franciscans don't hide their light under a bushel, it sounds like you're saying. And so in what ways does a Franciscan community differ from a Jesuit or a Dominican or other?
Well, I think for most ways we're very much alike, but there's one story that I like to tell about St. Francis that maybe gives the highlight for how we're different. As he was dying, the friars were worried. They gathered around him, and he was very sick, moments from death. And they said, what are we supposed to do when you're gone? And it wasn't just a question of how do we carry on. It was a question of what work, what activity, what ministry, what mission do we do when you're gone? Because up to that point, they just simply were following him. Okay, Francis went to do this, so we'll do that. So they said, what do we do? And Francis said, God showed me what was mine to do. Pray that he shows you what you're supposed to do. And that was it. So ever since then, in a lot of ways, our religious community has been very, very versatile. If the church needs something, if the Pope calls up and says, listen, we need you to do this, the friars have gone and done it. If a local community seems to have a need, the friars tend to be one who are quick to answer that need. So if it's missions in some of the poorest parts of the world, or if it's heads of some of the great theological schools in the world, and everything in between, the Franciscans have a long history of doing that. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty wide open.
So the knots on your cord refer, there's 3 knots, and mm-hmm. they refer to poverty, chastity, and obedience.
Yep.
Right? So talk about those 3, I guess, would you call them pillars or
vows?
Vows.
The vows, the 3 vows that we take as religious. The vow of poverty isn't for us a vow to be destitute in the street with nothing. For us, it's a simplicity of life, that we dedicate ourselves to living a simple life in common. So everything that we have, we share in common. So if I have a book on my bookshelf and someone needs it, well, it's theirs to take. If I have a computer that I'm not using this afternoon and someone needs it, it's theirs to take. It's not something I claim as my own. If I need a car, well, then I have access to use the car to run errands or to go visit family. Everything we have, we share. And that's what we mean by poverty. It's a simplicity of a way of life which is intended to challenge the world, challenge ourselves, and to mean that we're free. I don't have any possessions weighing me down. The vow of chastity means that we don't marry. We don't love the way that, let's say, my twin brother loves. So he has a wife he's very dedicated to, 5 young children that he's very dedicated to, and that's the vocation of his life. So for us, the chastity that we're called to is celibacy, and our life is dedicated to our religious community and those that we serve. And then the vow of obedience simply means that we rely on those brothers who are our ministers to help us understand what God is calling us to. It's not that my guardian, which is our term for a superior, can tell me what to do and micromanage my life the way that a boss at a job might. Rather, my guardian is supposed to be someone who helps me understand God's will for how I should live. So I ask him permission for certain things if I need certain things. I'll ask his advice or his wisdom or his direction. And then we have other levels of ministry, of leadership in our community that change every couple of years. So we're constantly electing new leaders, so there isn't one person who is the head of the order for any length of time. And the vow of obedience simply means if we live a life where we're not holding on to anything, we don't even hold on to our own will for our own lives. So if I get a phone call tomorrow from my minister provincial, which is the superior of the province, the area that I live, it says, Peter, we need you in Florida. We need you in Africa. Can you go to France? Can you go to Canada? Well, the answer is yes. That's happened to me. I didn't have to go to Africa, but I did have to move at a real short notice. And that's the freedom of our way of life. The 3 vows that we take mean, basically, we're really free to go and serve, to go and live, to go and minister where we're needed, when we're needed, and how we're needed.
I'm sure that there's a certain kind of friction that comes from struggling with, I'm sure that there's a struggle with all 3 of those vows. An inner struggle, right?
Oh boy, yeah, very, very much so.
Right.
Yeah.
So how does that friction create some kind of heat? I guess that would be would deepen your faith. Talk a little bit about how resistance helps deepen your sense of faith.
If the vows were easy, I don't know if they would be as meaningful. And the longer that I've done this, I've been ordained a priest now for almost 3 years. I've been in the community now for 12 years. And one of the things that I found is it's more difficult than I thought it was going to be. I heard somebody say a couple weeks ago, boy, if I knew then what I know now, would I do it again? I think the answer is yes, but I probably would have gone about things a little bit more differently. The friction of the vows means I can't do this by myself. I can't. And I think that was one of the initial ideas that brought me to be a Franciscan, was the idea that if God was calling me to be holy, if God was calling me to a different way of happiness, a different path to true joy, there's no way I could have done this by myself. And so the further I go into this, the more I realize if I want to live poverty, if I want to be simple in my life and not try to get something new and greater and better, I've got to actually let my community, my brothers, the real guys I live with, challenge me on that. If I want to live chastity, which is very, very difficult, especially in the world that we're in today, I've got to build relationships with the guys that I live with. I can't just simply somehow do this on my own. It's not possible. It just isn't possible. If I want to live obedience, if I actually want to get to a point where I learn a new way of being humble, which is what the obedience vow is supposed to be, I've got to let those who are over me have control over me in some way. And conveniently enough, or oddly enough, or frustratingly enough, It's never in the ways that I would like. So if I wish that a superior or a minister would answer my questions about what am I supposed to do in a few years with the next step of my religious life, they're not going to tell me what to do. But in the areas where I don't want them to tell me what to do, that's when they say, oh, no, please listen to what I have to say. It's really easy to see the hand of God at work in those moments because it's challenging. I've never had a challenge that didn't lead me to a better place. But it's been difficult, but worth it. That's been my experience of the vows.
Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about recruiting or evangelizing and proselytizing and where the Franciscan order falls in that?
We have in our world religious people who go about actively seeking to get people to convert to their religion, their faith, their way of life. And while the Franciscans have a history of being missionaries, there's always been a fine balance between being a missionary and proselytizing. Proselytizing has always been, as long as I've understood the term, an insult to others. That if I go out and I say to you, you're walking your street corner or you're sitting in your home comfortable having dinner, and I start knocking on the door or I track you down and say, here, have some paperwork, let me convince you to think, to believe, to look at the world the way that I do, there is something a little bit insulting about that. Because it begins with the idea of you're missing something, you're lacking something, I've got something better. And the way to deal with that is through me convincing you. The approach that we've always taken. Now, we've had, if it's an 800-year-old order that was started at the height of the Catholic Church's political power. So we've got some messy history and some really messy history. But the missionary activities of the Franciscans have been much more aimed at going to where those people are poor in the world, whether it's poor in spirit, but most especially those who are materially poor, those who have a great want for food, water, clothing, and education. Going in their midst and caring for them. And in the process, then offering an invitation, but never the expectation. That's the difference between evangelizing, which is sharing the gospel, and proselytizing, which is pushing the gospel onto people. It's an invitation versus an expectation or being forceful about it. And so we have a long history of being missionaries, a very long history of being missionaries, of going throughout the world. I used to live with a Franciscan who was a missionary in Ghana for 7 years. And his main activity was working at the local parish, where when people who had no idea who he was about, why he's wearing a goofy outfit, answering questions, serving the poor, bringing water to those who need it, helping out at the school, all those very real everyday activities. And in doing that with joy, in doing that with peace, and in doing that differently than other people, then people are attracted and they say, well, what makes you so joyful? What makes you want to do this? That's been the approach that we've taken more often than not.
Lay people may feel they have a calling to serve in a soup kitchen or get involved in some kind of charitable endeavor. Mm-hmm. What is it that makes somebody, or made you specifically jump into giving your life to a Franciscan?
The answer is a profoundly personal one. I think it's as personal as asking somebody who's married and devoted to their spouse, what made you romantically attracted to this person? Most people in our world have had that experience. Heaven knows I fell in love when I was in high school, and she broke my heart. But I've had some experience of what that's like, and the answer is similar. to why I felt called to this. I had a profound experience of God, of Jesus. And there was something that stirred in the depths of who I was at the early age of 14. And I spent almost 10 years of my life trying to figure out, what was that? What was that stirring? What was that excitement? What was that passion? And what do I do with this? Because I have hobbies, I have interests, I have things that I enjoy doing for fun and for relaxation, but none of those filled or met that excitement or that joy. And then one day I picked up a book that was a biography of St. Francis. And I was introduced to this guy who, and I don't know if this was completely made up or imagined, but it seemed like he himself wrestled with the same passion, the same romantic notions, the same excitement, the same desires, that he spent time trying to figure out what was this about. And his reaction to it was genuine. He went at this and said, okay, if I want this, if this is really what's bubbling up in the depths of who I am, if I really feel motivated by this crazy guy, Jesus of Nazareth, I'm going to do it without any half measures. I'm going to give everything. I'm not going to say, I'll give a little bit and then go some other way that's more comfortable. He was thought of as a madman by many because of how devoted he was. So when I read the story of his life, that excited me. And it seemed to fit. The story of what he did got me excited. It got me interested. It motivated me. It gave me something to pray about. And thinking about it drew me closer to God in my own faith. So I spent 9 years of my life, from 14 to 23, thinking about this. And so when I finished up college, I said, the only way that I'm going to know for sure, if this is it, if this is the fulfillment of my excitement, if this is what that passion is about, I've got to try it. And so I went and I did, and I've been here ever since because it is, because it's so personal, because there's nothing I would want to do than get out of bed every morning and dedicate myself to the ideals of this religious order, to the faith of the Catholic Church, and bottom line, I go to bed every night knowing that in some way, sometimes small, maybe sometimes big, the world is better because of what I did that day. I like living that way. I really, really find great joy in that. So if it's laboring in the classroom teaching high school students, or if it's working in a parish as I have done, working in a soup kitchen, rebuilding homes for the poor, or studying myself as I did for many years leading up to this point. If I get to do that, if I get to live in a way that helps the world be better, it's worth doing.
Well, Father Peter, thank you so much for coming on and talking with us about life as a Franciscan friar. You can find out more information about the Franciscan Friars at olaprovince.org. And until next time, keep it between the white line and the ditches.